Hi, I thought I'd try an experiment going to IMSLP and showing you how to bring up some scores for analysis. This, I find, is an extremely valuable resource that is unmatched for public domain music. So we'll go and search for a composer. You can search by different ways here. We'll search for the actual composer. Maybe we want to go to Tchaikovsky. We'll find him in this list of all of these public domain listings, most of which are by long dead composers. But if you want to put your music on and let people have access to it through common copyright, you can sign up for an IMSLP page and do that if you like as well. So we'll go to Tchaikovsky, and this time of year, let's say we want to listen to some of the Nutcracker Suite. Now, you know what? Let's listen to Swan Lake. There we go. So we'll bring up Swan Lake, and you'll notice that if it's a popular piece and there's a Naxos recording available, you can go and bring that up and listen to that along with the score. So we'll go and bring up the finale, the famous Flight of the Swans, and I already have that preloaded here, so you can download this if you like and store it on your computer, and for later you don't have to go to the website then. So let's bring up the score that I already have. I already have as well the Naxos recording getting ready to play. So what I can do is now just play the score and analyze it as I listen to it. There you go, and you can go and do that for thousands of scores. There's no better way to get into analyzing things and getting a feel for how things sound as an orchestra on the page by doing this. But if you want to then take it one step further, obviously not many can just look at a score like this as it's playing and intuitively know exactly what's going on. So what I like to do when I want to dig in a little further is I'll take the orchestral score and I'll reduce it down to a piano part that I can kind of see what's really going on harmonically and melodically here. And I think this is something that everybody can take advantage of. Don't just look at the score, do something with it, analyze it, write the notes down, play it, write it, turn it into a piano piece like this, and then play it. That's the only way you're really going to digest what's going on in these big orchestral scores. And I do believe I heard a little bit of John Williams in there, to be honest. So perhaps this is a good way to start going about analyzing scores together. Let me know what you think. Perhaps we really didn't do much analysis here, but we can take it that one step further and go through pieces like this that are in the public domain so we don't get into trouble.
So let's do a little bit of analysis on this piece. First off, let's look at the scoring of it, the orchestration. Now, this is written 1875 to 1877, so it's a pretty mid-late Romantic work. You know, the Romantic period starting around 1830 to 2530. Or you can't put an exact date on things, but let's just take a little bit of a look backwards. Now, what we have here, obviously, it's a big orchestra, but not huge. Piccolo, flutes, oboe, clarinet, bassoons. We've got four horns, cornets and trumpets, tenor trombones, bass trombones, tuba, timpani, cymbals, bass drum, the harp, and the strings. Let's go back and ask ourselves, all right, how does this kind of orchestration fit into the scheme of things in terms of classical orchestration? So if we go back to, say, the end of the Baroque period with Bach in a cantata, his Magnificat, um, relatively large orchestra for the time, three trumpets, a timpani, flutes, oboes, and strings. Of course, in those days, you didn't have a bass and a cello in the orchestra. There'd be a continuum part where the bass instruments would play along with organ or harpsichord or something to play the continual part. And of course, and at that time, your brass instruments didn't have valves, so everything was based on playing harmonics. Uh, Obviously, the kind of sounds you could get from the orchestra were limited. Certainly, you could get color out of the orchestra, but nothing like what Tchaikovsky had at his disposal. So if we go forward a bit from 1732-35 to 1795, Haydn's Symphony 104, so late Haydn Symphony. At this point, we have flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons. We got um, horns, trumpets still valveless, timpanis, and strings. Again, not too different than the Baroque orchestra, adding to the sound. Obviously, the color palette is increased considerably. 1795. So let's go forward a little bit. Let's go to Beethoven, late Beethoven's ninth. So now the orchestra is expanded again. We have flutes, oboes, clarinets that are all doubled, bassoons, horns, a couple kinds, and trumpets, timpani, and strings. Not overly different than the Haydn arrangement. 1824. But now if we go a little bit further, let's go to Berlioz, 1830. Of course, Berlioz was known for his orchestration, even wrote the famous treatise on it that you can get. translated into English, the Berlioz Strauss Treatise, which is really nice because it has a lot of musical examples in it, and it's a very nice historical uh, thing to look at in terms of orchestration. So here we have things expanded a little bit more. Flutes, oboes, clarinets. We got horns, trumpets, cornets. Now trombones, bass trombones. A tube is added. A couple timpanis. More percussion than we'd see before. And strings. Now, 18 1830s, around that time, is important for orchestration because we start seeing at this time, 1810 to 1830, 1835, the orchestra starts getting uh, double action harps. So the harp becomes totally chromatic. Uh, Brass instruments start getting valves. Tube is added. Uh, the range of the orchestra obviously much increased. So very, very important difference between romantic and classical orchestras is that the orchestra of the romantic composer could get a lot more color because of more instruments, more range, and of course, the romantic idea of color in general. So let's take things just one step further here before we go and really analyze the Tchaikovsky. And let's look at, well, what happens after this point in terms of the orchestra? Well, let's go to Strauss, 1889. And so we've got like 10 years later, and we see the orchestra is even more fully expanded. We've got, flutes, piccolos, oboes, English horn, clarinets, bassoons, contrabassoon, four horns, three trumpets, trombones, bass trombone, tuba, obviously, timpani, percussion. He adds a glockenspiel and harp and strings. A few years later, Strauss's orchestra, which gets really huge, again adds English horns, bass clarinet, contrabass, bassoon, 8 horns here, a couple harps. Now we're getting to the point of really large film orchestra, maybe even larger than what would be used in a film. So that's about as big as you get. By the end of the 1800s, the orchestra is pretty much at its full size, and that happened in a pretty short time. About 50 years, the orchestra goes from almost a classical sized entity to this really huge thing that we can see today. Now, when we get back to the Tchaikovsky, one thing, let's just look at the orchestration here. Obviously, a very nice use and prominent use of harp in this piece. But let's take a look at what goes on in the harp. If you notice, we start all in the key of B minor, and we get to a point here in this piece where the harp is notated in C flat. Well, what's going on here? C flat? Holy cow. So let's listen to what's going on in that place. Well, obviously, after all that B minor, at this point, the music makes a shift to the parallel major, to B major, and the harp is notated in C flat and harmonically, not B major. This is a common practice. And why? Well, the double action harp, actually, its default position when all the pedals are up is actually C flat. and harpists maintain that you get a lot more resonance and the more full sound to the harp uh, if you did that than put pedals down to make it uh, B and B. So it's a very common practice to set the harp enharmonically when you want to maximize the resonance of the thing. Okay, now finally we can get to the music and say a few things about this wonderful piece. What I've done here is instead of just reduce it down to a piano part, I've taken it and created a little short score for myself to give me the melody on one line, basic harmony on the other, and I want to stick the bass line on its separate stave so I can see what's going on in terms of bass motion. Now, if you notice, the melody itself is diatonic. It's actually kind of modal in its own way. It doesn't really have A sharps going to Bs. It doesn't. It's not perceived as if it's really a strong tonal melody in B minor, though the harmonies are certainly using dominance of B minor. So there's no question the piece is strongly centered around B minor. But remember, Tchaikovsky was Russian, and he very often used Russian folk tunes, and he had a strong folk influence in his music, and that I think you can hear here. Um, I've just used the notation program to put this in, and the default Notion instrument. So just bear with me there. So, I mean, harmonically at the beginning here, it's pretty straightforward. It kind of maintains a tonic pedal going from minor to subdominant above that, the, the tonic to subdominant back to tonic. So we have a strong tonic center at the beginning of this thing. And then we have this wonderful diminished chord that uses this passing motion through a 4 chord inversion to 5 and then back to 1. So this is really the interesting part here. And of course, one of the wonderful things here is this D above the 5/7 chord creates a really nice color in terms of the harmony. It's not overly dissonant, but you could definitely hear that this is not something that a classical composer would really do, a jump to a dissonance and then a jump back to a consonance in terms of the chord itself. And of course, it comes about because of the kind of modal usage that Tchaikovsky is using in this tune. Now, this diminished chord is another interesting thing that goes on. It's kind of used there for color. And a classical composer probably wouldn't use a diminished chord like that. They'd be more inclined to resolve that diminished chord because of the strong motions that would be perceived at that time. Now, of course, we could do something like that if we wanted to be more like a classical composer. This G sharp diminished chord would naturally want to move to, at least as notated, to an A major chord on the page, and that makes perfect sense in the key of D minor, because A major we'll make a 5/7 chord there. A major would become the 5 of 3, and in a classical composition, 3 would be the first place that a composer would think of moving in a minor key piece to the relative major. And we can try doing that. So we'll take a 5 of 3 chord and let's move to 3 then. And all right. And in terms of the melody, we probably want to do something like this. Now, of course, this is going to destroy our piece, but it'd be a much more classical kind of resolution than what Tchaikovsky's using here. Well, that makes perfect harmonic sense, though creates a totally lousy feel for what we want here. So let's get rid of that, and let's talk a little bit more about this diminished chord. Now remember, diminished chord is composed of minor thirds packed on top of each other. And one of the nice things about a diminished chord, because it's symmetrical in this way, is that it can resolve up a half step from any of its tones. So as we saw, as this is notated, you'd think it'd want to resolve to A, but Tchaikovsky's just using it as a colorful thing to pass through to the dominant. But this chord could also resolve in a more classical sense to from the B going up to a C, but C is nothing near the key of B minor. That's probably not feasible. A D could resolve to a D sharp or an E flat. Um, Again, that's nowhere near my key of B minor. Even for Tchaikovsky, that is going to sound kind of strange, though maybe not uh, a bit later in the Romantic uh, period. And the F could be taken as a note that could be enharmonically an E sharp, so that could resolve up to an F sharp. And well, that makes perfect sense because F sharp is my dominant. So instead of this passing motion, it's probably feasible. I mean, Tchaikovsky could have taken this chord and say used a melodic minor motion up there and um, uh, used it as a dominant chord, moving to the tonic in this way, and that probably would work. But that G is a little bit dissonance against that. Harmonically, it works fine, but melodically now I have a problem, and Tchaikovsky solved that problem, obviously, by making sure he harmonized that G against the four chord in passing. So now the piece continues, and there's just some basically passing motion here. This isn't really a seventh chord. It's more just incidental. That A against the B is just there for color. It's a passing motion. And now we have the theme repeated again, only Tchaikovsky starts using a little bit of chromatic motion in the bass. And here's where it's good to write the bass separately, where I can see he's just really descending stepwise all the way through down to the dominant from the tonic and going back to the tonic. Similar chords that he used the first time, only now he's adding a few passing chords and so this really it's really colorful in the way that the harmonies move. Obviously, there's a lot of pretty simple classical harmonic motion going on here, where we have the tonic chord. This is just a passing chord. We go back to our diminished chord, but that turns out to be just a chromatic passing motion uh, back to a 4 chord, an inversion, which again, all these are just kind of passing till I get to my uh, second inversion chord on tonic, but that's still just is all one big passing motion. Here we get to a 5-4-2 chord, which is resolved as we would expect classically, the 4-2 resolving to a 1-6 chord. Then we have another 5 chord in a 4-3 inversion, moving down to a tonic. So this is all kind of progressions that you could find in Bach for this kind of stuff, with maybe perhaps this G sharp color motion moving to the dominant chord. But other than that, that is all pretty typical standard classical harmony there. And at the end here, we kind of just do our same thing we did before. Only he adds in a little more passing motion in now than he did the first time. So that's all explainable. And now we start getting to the interesting stuff. Now we can really start hearing something that's totally different than what I would expect to hear in classical music. The first part sets up something that's traditionally classical. Here we have the A chord. So here we have the 5 of 3, moving to a 5, 7, a 4, 2 chord, right? Which any classical composer would probably resolve to 3. But Tchaikovsky doesn't. He resolves it to F sharp. So he kind of gives us this deceptive motion. But F sharp is the minor dominant. So this gives us a very modal feel. And after the F sharp chord, we go to an E minor chord. So minor chords a step apart. Very modal kind of sound. So here we can really kind of hear how he's setting up. This very kind of folk minor modal business. Now, if we were a classical composer, we'd want to resolve this to the D chord. So let's try doing that. What would it sound like if he resolved this the way a classical composer would normally try and do it? Well, yeah, that works, and it's totally functional, but I lose that wonderful modal motion that obviously he wanted there. And now I'm back to the subdominant, but it kind of doesn't sound that way because of that minor dominant before it. Kind of has my ear in flux. I'm not quite sure where things are anymore. Now I get to a big, strong dominant. This is the 5 of 5, and that does go to 5, back to 1. So here we have a motion from here on that would be very classical. But what happened before it really turns it into something very unique. Now let's continue. So I get back to my tonic over here. And we repeat. Now we get back to now we go to something else. Here we have a strong dominant feel. I want to go to C major now with this G7 chord. And I do go to C, and I don't know where I am harmonically right now because now I'm in C, which has nothing to do with B major. So we're in motion now. And so now I'm in C. Now I get a C7-4-2 chord. I want to go to F major very badly at this point. This is what the classical composer would do, even though it's kind of far afield from B minor. And if I'm going to F major, that wouldn't even be close to D major, which would be the relative major. So you could see in the romantic model, you can move from key to key much quicker and more abruptly than you typically do in classical music. But let's see what's going on here now. When I'm on this C7 chord, what I really want to do is hear that go to F major, but he's going to a 5 to get back to 5, to get back to my tonic. So what would it sound like if I went to that more classical progression and I take my C7 chord and resolve that to an F major in first inversion? So let's see. Now let's see. We have this guy. Maybe we make him go down here, and because I don't want to have an A here with an A in the bass. And now we'll resolve this guy to a. What would that sound like? And let's back up a little bit. Well, that could work. I mean, harmonically, yeah. But of course, Tchaikovsky wants to get back to B minor, and I don't want to be in F major or anywhere near there to get back. I'm a tritone away from B minor if I go here. So Tchaikovsky instead, what he does is gives us that wonderful um, kind of half step motion going from a C7 chord to a C sharp 7 chord that, I mean, in classical music would sound very abrupt, and it does sound kind of abrupt here, but it's really nice because it lets me go back to B minor. So in Romantic period, you can have, say, parallel dominant seventh chords that are non-functional to each other to allow you to uh, move back to somewhere you need to go. So now, that almost sounds like a progression that he used in his piano concerto. So now I'm back to B minor, and Tchaikovsky just repeats the opening theme, but he does something very special. Ah, what in the heck is he doing here? This is where we start sounding like John Williams, or where John Williams starts sounding like Tchaikovsky. Uh, he obviously wanted to give us a little bit of a different sound than he did the first time, and in the original, it doesn't sound very much like it here. Remember, that's where the horns start coming in, and this becomes very brassy and big. But we get to this point here, and we have this very complex harmonic thing going on. Where we have a diminished fourth, this kind of very unusual kind of interval, certainly for a classical composer to use. Totally colorful, um, and basically it's harmonized against a four chord in first and in second inversion. Though there's a little appoggiatura here going on where there's an F natural going down to an E, which creates even further dissonance in color in this section, though that F kind of goes with the D above here. But here we have a sound that you can really hear where some of the modern composers can take things. I mean, that's Star Wars in there, man. You can really hear, even though you'd never think that Star Wars could in any way be derived from Swan Lake, but um, you can hear it pretty clearly. So after this repeat, now we get back and we repeat that. Okay, and here Tchaikovsky's had enough of B minor. He wants to get to the ending, and what he does, and which is very common in romantic music, and even some classical composers will do this. they'll get to a dominant chord when you're in minor, and all of a sudden just go to the parallel major. Obviously, very simple thing to do. And now when he's in major, he just kind of has very simple harmonies with a little bit of a counterpoint going on in the horns. So here you can hear non-harmonic tones and a really colorful presentation that you wouldn't hear in classical music that much. Though harmonically, there's nothing really out of the ordinary. It's something that you could hear in classical music. Basically, you have a tonic pedal and he's basically alternating a seven chord going back to the tonic. But above that, he has this wonderful sixth kind of non-harmonic resolution that really adds color. Same thing here, where you can hear that sixth resolving up in this passing motion. And so the sixth is a very important color note in romantic music. And now he just has a little bit of again, all this tonic pedal kind of continuing, where he had another colorful little thing going on here. We'll have a 7 of 2 going to 2 above that tonic pedal. So you get that rich dissonant motion which is created by that tonic pedal, even though the progression itself is rather traditional above that. And then he kind of just has 4/3 suspensions going on against that, so it creates a kind of a complex feel. But from a traditional standpoint, you could see stuff kind of like this in the classical period, but the way it's done here, it's more dissonant and with a little more color than you'd see in a classical composition. But the 4/3 resolutions up there, that's kind of something that could even come out of the Baroque period. So there's nothing earth-shattering about any of these individual components, but when you put them all together, it really comes out sounding much more complex than anything you'd hear in the classical era, and really kind of romantic. Yeah, I mean, I can hear a Baroque progression in there if I change some of these notes to be more consonant. And then at that point, he just basically repeats that. Okay, so we get to the end there, and he has a progression. It could almost be Beethoven, who in a lot of his ending motions just keeps repeating that tonic motion over and over and over to you, or a dominant motion over and over and over, often with a pedal. But Tchaikovsky does something very interesting here that is a little out of the ordinary for a classical composer to end a piece. And if you notice, what he does is, instead of just hammering home the tonic over and over again, instead of just having a tonic chord progressing up, he adds color to it. He adds that sixth in here, so he kind of has a six chord over the five. Even though you kind of perceive it as overall just tonic repetition, but color coming in. Um, Beethoven or someone would maybe just repeat the uh, the tonic, and then over here he has a three chord against this motion, which is really the third of the tonic going up to the fifth of the tonic. Um, again, color, um, using minor chords, whereas, uh, listen to it one more time. Whereas a classical composer would probably turn everything into the tonic, or maybe this could be the dominant going here, but let's make it all tonic. All right, let's see what that would sound like if I'm more a classical composer wanting to end. Uh, it works, but it's not nearly as colorful as what Tchaikovsky chose to do. So there you have it. Um, Hopefully, I've pointed out a number of things that indicate uh, what a romantic composer might do in relationship to a more classical treatment. And of course, this is still a very tonal and simple harmonic piece. If we wanted to start analyzing a piece by Mahler or Strauss in this same time period, we'd have a lot more complexity on our hands, both melodically, harmonically, contrapuntally, and perhaps that might be a good exercise to look at one of those pieces in the future. But hopefully this little analysis for some of you that aren't used to looking at music in this way is helpful, and hopefully we can do this again.